Now smart money from my perspective is how a brand is looking at how do I get product in front of the customer wherever he or she is, and wholesale becomes a much more important piece.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook presented by Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 77, and today's guest is Ken Pilot. The best way to describe Ken is as a connector. He's had a long run in retail on the brand side, and his second act has brought him to being an advisor, an investor, and a go-to person for all things related to retail technology. Before we get started, a quick thank you, as always, to Max Brandstetter of the Wild Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ken Pilot. Ken is a seasoned retail executive with operating experience consisting of C-level roles at Gap Inc., J.Crew, Ralph Lauren, American Eagle, and ABC Carpet and Home. He was the co-founder and CEO of Robot Galaxy and has an advisory practice that focuses on advancing direct-to-consumer methodology through technology and use of space. Over the past 7 years, Ken has invested in and served as operating partner of various technology companies with a primary focus on retail stores, e-commerce, and retail operations. As part of his relationships with founders, he's provided key introductions to retail industry leaders, strategically positioning each platform relative to the needs of the brand. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here and good to see you. It's been a
Yeah,
while.
yes,
You
it
look
has.
good.
Good.
You look you
Same
look
here.
good.
Thank you very much. It's good to be seen. Before we get into your background, which is always part of our show here, you're kind of a connector, which I have always found interesting, about you. And I was going to ask this later in the show, but when people ask you to describe what you do today and what you are, it must take you quite a while to do that. And that's without, you just being boastful because you're involved in a lot of different things. So let's set the stage. What are you, Ken Pilot?
It's a good question. That question usually starts with my family. My wife in particular. My kids have kind of given up on describing what dad does. I'm probably like the C-uh-oh. That's a new category, C-uh-oh. I see a lot of opportunities out there, and I try to really focus them on an area that I'm passionate about, you're passionate about, which is retail. So I look at what I'm doing today really sits in 3 buckets. I have an advisory group, which consists of one other person, Paige Perkins, who works with me out of Atlanta, a true talent. And we work with generally one brand at a time and advise them on a variety of things, anything from how to scale their online business to growing their stores, what their structure of the company should look like to merchandising. So there's an advisory piece. The other side of the business is a venture piece where I've been investing in companies or advising, but mostly investing in different tech platforms that support the retail ecosystem. So platforms that are focused with online or stores, operations, even expense control. And then recently decided to somewhat bring the two pieces together and launch a podcast, The Retail Pilot, which seemed sort of a natural extension of what I was doing. And I needed something else to do because clearly the former wasn't keeping me as busy as I would like. So decided to go back to the connector piece that you mentioned, connect with many that I know out there at the CEO level, either former or current, and really talk to them about their business, how they're running their business, the challenges of their business, and also how they're leveraging technology today to take the business forward. And I think you, more so than many, appreciate what's happening on the tech side. I mean, you've seen many challenges as you've grown big e-commerce platforms and led digital teams in your past life. But you and I both know that if you're not leaning forward into technology, you're going to fall back quickly. I think that's kind of a summary of what I do. It's not a straightforward answer because it involves different parts, but it does all focus on retail, and that's what I'm passionate about.
Cool. And we'll come back to kind of the things that you're doing today with retail and tech. But one of the things we do on the show all the time is we get the first story from people. You talk about kids. Oftentimes, I find in the guests that I speak with, something in their early life, in their growing up, kind of was a foreshadow for what they would do. So you've been involved in retail and technology. Anything growing up? Where did you grow up? And anything that while you were becoming Ken Pilot that might have told us, what you would do in your career?
Was born in Manhattan. I failed all the private school exams. The Rorschach test threw me for a loop. When I was asked what that looks like at the age of, I don't know, 4 or 5, I looked at this ink splatter and I said, it looks like shit. They immediately turned to my mother. They thanked her very much and sent me on my way, which got us up to Westchester County. So I grew up in Westchester County, only child, scrappy. You had to kind of fight for everything out there, friends, buddies, companions, because you're living at home, you're working alone, and then you go out in the world and you got to meet. And you didn't have a big brother to beat up your bullies. You didn't have a sister to connect you with girlfriends. Everything had to kind of come from yourself. So I think in part, being an only child was led me to be an entrepreneur, and I was always doing one-off projects. I mean, crazy stuff. I skipped over delivering newspapers, but I shoveled driveways. Got very into photography in high school. Actually, had a job developing black and white photography at a local camera store. I mean, it was all done by hand. It was like me at the age of 16 or 17, ingesting fumes in the back room, putting out black and white prints. I was also a tennis player growing up. I strung tennis rackets. I did tennis lessons. Actually, when I got out of college, I began, I ran a tennis camp in the Hamptons. That was fun when you were 18, 19 years old, part of Future Stars. That was a great opportunity. And, really from then on, just got into doing different projects until I actually took a full-time job entering the Macy's training program, which was my first quote unquote real job.
I think what's interesting about, your career and your life is you've kind of had two careers. And if you will, humor me, the first career was, working in the brands that I mentioned, earlier. So if we kind of go back, to the late 80s, early 90s, yeah, you mentioned the Macy's program, but you had a lot of formidable years at the Gap. So tell us a little bit about your experience there. You were president of Gap Global.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest break I had at the Gap was at the time I thought the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I was a GMM of one of the divisions for the Gap, and they asked me to start the outlet business, which we really didn't have. And I didn't want to start the outlet business. That's like literally became known as the undertaker of the Gap. So I move into this job, and Don Fisher had asked me to take it on. So I had to say yes. Mickey was supportive of taking it on, and he didn't really want to know about it, but he said, take it on anyway. So here I am sitting alone, looking at this opportunity to bring Gap into the outlet space. We had a few stores at the time that were kind of quasi outlet stores, but there was no outlet strategy. These stores that were just underperforming and taking huge markdowns and liquidating goods. So I was basically given this entrepreneurial opportunity as an entrepreneur operating inside of a company to build a business. And the biggest challenge was trying to hire people internally. They would see my number light up on their phone and just hang up. Who wanted to work for Ken, the outlet guy? Anyway, we built a team, and in 36 months, opened up 100 stores and became the not only the fastest growing division, and we were competing against Old Navy, but we were the most profitable part of the company, from a return on asset point of view, certainly return on inventory. Our margins were off the chart. I mean, going back Mark, we had four-wall profit in the high 30s, low 40s. Back then you really weren't paying much for real estate. Maybe your rents were running at 2%. Margins were great. We were producing our own product, and that was fun. We were taking everyone's bestsellers from the year prior and remaking them with the factory at a better price. And if and when merchants had a problem moving merchandise, they had to come to us. And we basically had a flat rate that was offered to everyone, so we didn't negotiate it. Every merchant hated that rate because it was onerous. But we took the goods and built a $500 million business. And from there, went on to run Gap International, and from Gap International, then Gap Brand Global.
You talked about intrapreneur, and that's such an interesting opportunity. And I guess, when you got to American Eagle and you started a brand there, that's a fun experience to have this, what I envision, this large, deep pocket organization that allows you to do some things, kind of scut work to get something going.
Yeah, it's much different than a true startup. Certainly, as startups are looked at today, and the focus now being much more on being profitable. How are you spending your money? Versus you're a startup, it doesn't matter if you make money, spend everything you've raised. But working within a corporation, you do have a lot of leverage. Cash is available. Systems are available, people are available, and so many other opportunities that you can never bring to a very small company if you were on your own.
How did you deal, at the Gap, if you kind of think about when the web became prominent, there was so much conversation in businesses, about the web cannibalizing, let's say a catalog business that might have existed or even the retail store business. I would imagine that developing an outlet chain in essentially what was a full price business, the Gap brand, there must have been some conversation about what kind of cannibalization will exist or will happen. How did you deal with that?
I would focus on what Old Navy was doing to everyone else just to get their focus away from me, because it was interesting, Mark. Really, at the time, think about it. If you were in Gap, and maybe this was a critical point, but if you were in Gap, you had two things coming at you. And the first and foremost was Old Navy. Old Navy, if you recall, really started more on the strip center side of the business, and then quickly started to fill into the malls. So at Gap, just with the Gap mindset on it, was Old Navy was the bigger challenge and seen as the bigger competitor. Outlet was the least of everyone's worries at the time.
And then, as I mentioned, so you go to American Eagle, talk about the brand that you created there. And what was the charge? Why that brand within American Eagle? What were they trying to accomplish?
Well, I think what inspired at the time, it was Roger and Jim O'Donnell. They were really looking to create something in the active space, something that was at a higher price point, something that included brands like, whether it was a Stone Island or the feeling of a Montclair, Italian inspired streetwear that you could wear. Really, it was the early part of athleisure. They had brought in a design couple from Abercrombie and Fitch, who were the first two designers that Mike Jeffries had hired to lead the charge on the design side. So the goal was to build this active inspired brand. The majority of the product coming from the label we were developing, which became known as Martinosa, and then maybe 20 to 30% of the product to be third party product, very consistent with what J. Crew was doing at the time, buying a fair amount of third party product to really accent, or rather augment, what we were doing. So looking for footwear, potentially watches or outerwear, or key items that were just additional pieces that they could add to Martinosa.
So, up until then, you had spent most of your career, I think, on the apparel side, and now you jump to ABC Carpet and Home, different vertical. What was that like? Trying to learn a new business.
Well, that one was a little more complicated, in as much as it involved family. ABC Carpet and Home was founded by my uncle.
Ah, I didn't know that. Okay, cool.
Subsequent to that, my cousin Paulette and cousin-in-law Evan came in and started the home business. So my uncle founded Carpet, Paulette and Evan founded Home. Paulette and Evan ended up separating, and Paulette was running the business and asked me to come in and partner with her. And I thought at the time the brand was so much bigger than the business that there'd be a real opportunity to find outside investment and take the business to the level of the brand. Perhaps if I listened to my uncle, I may have made a different move. My uncle said to me, and I think he was right, there's no greater oxymoron than a good family business. But I didn't listen to my uncle, and I felt I'll prove him wrong. We can create a good family business. Unfortunately, my cousin and I saw things very differently. And although we worked together for 5 years, we were rather opposite, both in terms of our point of view around product and our point of view on people. And ultimately, we went our separate ways. ABC went through probably about 3 years ago, really during COVID, went through bankruptcy. They got crushed by the fact that so much of their business was coming out of one store versus online. And with that store being closed for a good portion of COVID, it just took the wind out of their sails. So they've since emerged from bankruptcy, different ownership, and on a different trajectory. But what I would say about the home business, I'm much more passionate about home than I am about apparel, for the main reason that buying something for your home is a much bigger decision and something that you tend to live with a lot longer. You don't like your shirt, you don't like your shoes, you don't like the belt, you don't like the coat. Yeah, you got other shirts, belts, coats, shoes to wear. But if you don't like that sofa, or you don't like that dining table, or the chair you just bought, you're kind of living with that for a while. So a more important decision. And I think it's something that really reflects who you are, because everyone that comes to your home, whether you're renting or an owner, is going to see this is how Mark sees himself. This is what he likes, from the chairs to the artwork to the rugs to the patterns you pick. It's just a much more important decision when it comes to purchasing home products. So I really like that.
The devil is in the details. You probably have heard that phrase time and time again in your professional life. Projects get started with great intentions, but you no longer have the time to pay attention to the little things that could make the difference between success and failure. At Details Interactive, you can discuss your business with a seasoned direct-to-consumer marketing executive who's helped launch and grow web businesses and integrate multi-channel marketing initiatives. Learn more at detailsinteractive.com. We're recording this show in mid-May of 2023. You're knee-deep in the retail space. What's the climate like right now?
Yeah, the climate now is rather challenging unless you're running a luxury business, which I just think that those guys are Teflon. I mean, you can look at the LVMHs of the world and oh my God, you start to look at their monthly numbers, up 20, up 23%, up 20, up 24%. But when you get into many companies out there that we know today that make up the middle, which is vast, the vast majority of retail brands right now are struggling. And I think they're coming off of what was a bit of a bounce from COVID. Coming out of COVID, we're now up against that. So the climate has been very difficult. And what I'm hearing, and the challenge that I face now on the advisory/investment side, is that many tech platforms are having to deal with that. And what they're hearing, or at least I'm hearing, is the following: if your platform or a tech platform wasn't part of our budget, we're not looking at it. If it is part of the budget and we haven't started spending on it yet, we're pushing it out. So the investment climate right now is very challenging. And you're really looking to find which brands are doing well, that can afford to keep things moving, making important investments around technology that I think are more, I would say, are tech light, in that there isn't a great deal of integration that needs to take place or is not business disruptive. like an ERP or dropping in a new OMS or even a point of sale solution, which are much bigger decisions. But what technology can we look at out there that can potentially move us forward without taking a lot of time and expense? So I guess in summary, tough environment. I don't know if we're in a recession. I think if we are, it's going to be a mild one, and I think the back half of the year is going to get better.
Well, let's hope so. That would be certainly for my business. That would be would be a good thing. I wanted to talk about something that I saw in the news. You actually talked about it on LinkedIn, and this new relationship with Nike and Dick's, and how they are levering the concept of omni-channel. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, Omni has gone a long way. You go back to hearing so much around D2C or digitally native brands and what they were doing, and the big push was all around growing online, growing online. And then from online, it really became stores and online. Now, smart money, from my perspective, is how a brand is looking at how do I get product in front of the customer wherever he or she is, and wholesale becomes a much more important piece. I mean, wholesale's been around forever. There's nothing new to it. But generally, you had brands that either focused on a wholesale channel or were very focused on a retail channel. Not many successful ones were doing both. And I think today, certainly when you look at what margins are like when you're running an online business, in many cases, the margins operating a wholesale business are better. And I think that brands are seeing that. You take a look at a brand like Faraday. Those guys have been doing wholesale for quite some time, and they have their own stores and they have online. So I think looking for the opportunity for smart distribution, which can't be just relegated to operating it yourself, but allowing others, and being very careful who those others are, because you are giving them your brand keys, and the way they represent you is important. I don't think you need to do wholesale with everyone. It's a select few that could be a really important partner. And I've seen, as I'm sure you have, Nordstrom has been a very good partner to many brands who are very focused on being direct to consumer with only their own stores and e-commerce. And Nordstrom's has done a good job, I think, presenting the product fairly well. But I also like it when brands can move inside of a large company and take space, even if it's lease operation space. Take a look at a brand like Land's End and what they did with Kohl's, opening up small 800 square foot, 1,000 square foot stores within their stores. And we're seeing it, whether it's in the beauty space, other brands who are taking space. A small brand like Reese has taken a number of locations inside of Bloomingdale's. I think it's a really smart way for a brand to expand, because it will better define them in a department store. And it's a hell of a lot less from a CapEx point of view than opening up your own store. And it can be done far more quickly. You can open up in a department store, in days, versus if you're lucky, you can get a deal done from the time you sign a deal to open a store, and maybe you can cut it down to 6 months. It takes a minimum of 8 weeks, 9 weeks to build out a store physically, forgetting the $200-300 a square foot that you're spending to open a store if you're good. So I like the idea of brands looking for the right strategic partners where they could potentially do a pop in, if you will, than doing their own real estate as a standalone strategy.
Come back to the Nike Dick's conversation. So, what relationship have they now forged that's a little bit different than what they've historically done together?
Yeah, I think, what I understood from that article and what I did hear when I was talking to the Dick's guys is that they are sharing online inventory to meet the needs of the in-store shopper, whether they're so a customer shopping at Dick's who might not be able to find a Nike sneaker in their size, they have the ability to get the customer that product through Nike's inventory. It's sort of an e-commerce version of wholesale, which is very close to a marketplace drop ship where the two are meeting each other. But I think it's very interesting, and I think it shows where you have two brands that are quite confident in the businesses that they're in, that there's a way for them to be 1 + 1 makes 3. And I'd love to dig more into that to know what it takes to actually combine those inventories, just to get a bit geeky. How do I create that? And I'm sure you're dealing with some legacy platforms as well. How are they creating that transparency so I can quickly satisfy that customer in a Dick's store or a customer shopping Dick's online with product that's available on Nike site?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, certainly being able to leverage all of the inventory and, thinking about it from the perspective of the customer, how do both brands together jointly serve the customer better than they were being served before? So that's good stuff. You spend a lot of time in investing in businesses. What's your thesis for what you like to invest in?
I'm not a classic investor. I don't represent anybody else's money. I just would prefer to lose my own than take someone else's money and lose theirs. I did that once when I launched the business Robot Galaxy, which was a great quote unquote project. And I'll just step back for a second. We launched that business, my partner Oliver Mitchell. It was his concept, but we put it together. Started in 2007, raised $7 million of strategic money, meaning we had the factory that was an investor. We had a comic book story. We had the writer investor, the guy who was doing all of our fixtures invested. So everybody all the way around our ecosystem had skin in the game. We opened up 2 stores really fast. We raised some friends and family money and went right into a recession 2008 2009 after opening up 3 locations, spending the money that we made, and the world literally stopped. So we although we had a term sheet from Disney and I thought that that might be an exit, they pulled back and just said we're not going to move forward. So unfortunately, there was no exit, or there was an exit, but there was an exit for Oliver and me, which wasn't a financial exit. It was just we fired ourselves because we could no longer afford us. And yeah, we lost money, and I lost money from friends and family whose money I went out and asked for, and I don't want to be in that position again. So right now, I put my own money to work when I find a platform out there that I see as being a platform that I would use today for addressing a specific area that I think needs to be addressed today to be a well-run company. So I might not find the perfect point of sale solution. And, I work with the guys at Predict Spring, but you need to have a new point of sale solution to move your business forward if you're a store. And I can say that about anything that I've invested in. It might not be the company that I invested in that will necessarily be successful in this space, but it's the area and the focus that they have that I think is important to moving the business forward. So I look at it that way. If I were a CEO today, what would I need from a technology perspective to move the company forward? And I'm also looking at who's the CEO, what's their background, the problem that they're solving, obviously, hopefully the customers they have, and most importantly, what does integration look like? Because as you well know, you just don't have these big IT teams that can take on a lot. And generally, the focus is let's preclude the company from getting hacked. I get an A, I go home, I start again the next day. Every project that a company takes on is just more work for the IT guy. Even though we hear it's a simple integration, this is no problem, we'll have you live in a week. Yeah,
Well,
we
you
hear
you
that a
you
lot.
you just took the words right out of my mouth. Being an investor myself, and then also sitting on the side of being sold by a lot of these companies, oftentimes they do in fact say, yeah, it's one line of JavaScript, and the implementation is easy, and the implementation is never easy, and it's always substantially longer. I get it. And as far as the investing, I think your thesis is interesting. What would you use? And for me, when and I'm just a very small investor. For me, it's so much about the founder. Do they have passion? Is this really a business, or is it just a hobby? And, those are a lot of the things that that I'm looking at. So, speaking of things that you're investing in, you are involved with a company in the circular economy. I actually am involved with a few different ones as well. For the listener, what does the circular economy mean by definition, and how is the company that you're involved with playing it?
Yeah, so the circular economy is basically allows product to go from the store to the customer and either back to the store or back to another customer. So the product goes around and around. It doesn't end up in landfill. So that's how I view the circular economy. Probably a horrible definition, but hopefully for the listener, we'll give them some clarity on what we're looking at here. The company that I'm working with is called Reup, and Lauren Vaughn, who's the CEO, had a very interesting idea, and I still love it today, which was I coined it buy now, sell later. Instead of BNPL, it's BNSL, which basically means imagine if a customer's on a website, take up something that's higher end, Montclair, and you buy a $3,800 Montclair coat. Now, that person might be a real fashion forward person that is not going to want to wear that Montclair coat from one season to the next. Imagine if at checkout, it offers that customer $1,408 for that coat if returned to Montclair within 18 months. So, okay, you don't have to hit that button at that point. You may get an email reminding the customer during the first 18 months that that still exists, but it allows the customer like a get out of jail free card or at 30% of the original value at some time during that 18 months. The cool thing is Montclair issues the credit, so you stay a Montclair customer versus the customer selling it to the real, which still I think supports the circular economy. But then the customer takes that $1,408 and they can buy anything with it. So I kind of like this model because it keeps the customer with the brand. And then Reup actually takes the product and resells the product. So they handle that piece. They handle the operational. So it's almost circular economy as a service.
It's interesting. It's almost like a car lease, right? You know that you're going to give it back at a moment in time. There's a residual value of the car. So as soon as you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So I love it. So you get to see lots of different things, folks. Ken's got a podcast. Give it another plug here, Ken. What's the podcast name?
Yes, the Retail Pilot Leaders and Legends. It's focused on CEOs, former and current, everything from Mickey Drexler and Mindy Grossman of the world to some of the people that are leading the newer, younger, smaller business, from Alex Faraday to Nate Checketts at Rowan to beauty and wellness. So we're covering a lot of good stuff.
That's great. I will make sure that I'm a listener, and our listeners should listen to Ken. He's got some great guests there. So we're down to the end of the show, Ken. I do this 2-minute drill, 7 questions, 1-word answer. Are you ready?
No.
All right. Well, I know you can't do it in 1 word. That's for sure. Okay. All right. Here we go. A brand that you admire or that inspires you.
On cloud running.
A favorite app on your phone.
Chat GPT.
Yeah, that would have been a whole podcast. The last website other than Amazon that you shopped from.
Todd Snyder.
Something that you're not good at but wish that you were.
Golf.
Join the club. Charitable organization that you're passionate about.
Delivering good.
If you had one superpower, what would it be?
Patience.
And other than family, what's your most prized possession?
Time.
76 guests, and I'm not sure anybody did it all 7 questions in 1 word. So kudos to you, Ken Pilot. It was good to see you, Ken. Where can people reach out to you on social media should they want to?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. I have all my contact information there. That'll work well. Just generally, one rule of thumb for me, I won't just accept a link or an invite. I want to know why. I'm happy to go back, trade an email or two, even hop on a call. if there's an interest, but I try to keep my LinkedIn group fairly tight as to people I know.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's good. Nice to see you again. I think we first met in my days at Steve Madden, and I've always enjoyed staying in contact with you and seeing all the good stuff that you're involved with. So, thanks for the time and thanks for sharing your story.
It's been great. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Ken Pilot for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1. Ken spoke about the CUO, his term for being able to see opportunities that you're passionate about and then go after them. On this show, we hear all about people who created their own opportunities, choosing not to sit back and wait for things to come to them, but to go after their passion. You can do that. It just needs some patience, some networking, and a good game plan. Number 2, the wholesale channel can be so important for a retailer, but it comes with challenges like everything else. Ken talked about how brands have started as digitally native, then they created their own stores, and then ultimately they leveraged other retailers to help extend their brands. The wholesale channel brings a retailer exposure and brand awareness, and of course, sales, but it's not always easy to control your message. So be assured that you partner with someone who will allow you to help craft that customer message. Number 3, whether you're a big or a small investor, you must have a thesis, that framework for what you choose to invest in. You can certainly vary your approach, but find something that you know, like retail tech, for example, and lay out how you decide what you'll invest in. For me, beyond the metrics and the concept, the founder is the key. Do you connect with them? Do they have the passion to stick this out? Because it's not easy. And also, can you determine whether this is really their business or simply their hobby? Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, the devil is in the details.